You're listening to Power Talk, Berkeley Electric Cooperative's official broadcast about the cooperative, our communities, and ways to use energy wisely. And now, let's join our hosts for today's episode. Good morning and welcome to Power Talk. I am Micah Ponce, the communications guy here at Berkeley Electric Cooperative, and I'm going to be one of your hosts today, along with Miss Libby Roig, the Director of Marketing and Communications. Good morning.
Thank you, Micah. It is a good morning. Happy to be here.
And, of course, we have a special in-studio guest, Mr. Tommy Harvey, the Director of Distribution Operations. Welcome, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.
Crowd goes wild.
All right.
So, Tommy, you're a regular here on Power Talk. You know, you already got your official mug, which I see you didn't bring, so I guess
No, I didn't. It was dirty. I used it this morning, so I didn't bring it in.
Well, one of the reasons why we ask you back all the time is, A, you got a lot of good information, and B, you'll tell us about it. You know, we like talking with you. But for those of you who might not have tuned in before and might not have been introduced to the man himself, Tommy, just tell us a little bit about what you do for the co-op. You know, you're familiar with the format. Let her rip.
Yep. So in the late 90s, I was hired here at Berkeley, 99, I think it was. I was hired here at Berkeley. I came onto the line crew as a helper. Spent the first 18, 19 years or so on the line crew. And late in 2017, I was fortunate enough to be promoted. I applied for and was promoted to the current role I'm in now. So,
well, richly deserved, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So,
I appreciate it.
Tommy, when you did your line work, was that mostly in the Johns Island district or?
No, it was. I started in Moncks Corner working
Okay.
for our system-wide crews, and did a lot of the larger scale underground construction and maintenance type jobs.
Nice.
And then a few years in that, and I moved to Moncks Corner, stayed strictly in Moncks Corner for a couple of years working for the district crews, doing overhead work then.
Okay.
And mostly overhead work, and we did some underground as well. And then ended up being promoted from Moncks Corner to a line foreman role back on system-wide, doing the larger underground projects again.
Gotcha.
So.
Gotcha.
Well, you mentioned overhead. I mean, and it's one of the things we want to talk about, David, because when people think about electricity and they think about, you know, power companies, you think about the poles and wires that you see, you know, up in the air. And that's what we call our overhead lines. In our 3-county service territory, which is Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester, we currently have around 2,800 miles of overhead distribution line. Is that
That's
right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, you know, that's a lot. How do we maintain that many miles of overhead line? And I mean, you know, I'm sure, you know, things change in terms of like technology. So I'm sure some of the lines need to be upgraded, but I mean, give us a little bit of a rundown on that type of operation.
Yeah, sure. So first, that 2,800 plus miles of line on the overhead side is our primary. That's our high voltage line only. That doesn't include all the overhead service wire that we've got strung, you know, from so many poles to houses and that kind of stuff. So when we reference these numbers, we're talking about primary high voltage lines is what we're talking about.
Right. Okay.
And that's obviously what everybody sees anyway. So we as far as what we do with it, that's a doing our overhead maintenance is a big deal every year, Micah. We budget, we plan for in the budget each year line patrol dollars that we bring on contractors, specialized contractors that handle this for us. They'll come in, we give them a schedule every year. We rebid the contract, bring them in, give them a schedule, and they methodically work their way across the system in the areas that we designate we want them to look at. And we have a list. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but it's what we call our worst performing feeder list. So we monitor and track the performance of our distribution system, both overhead and underground, and we split that out between the two. In this particular contract that I'm talking about, we bring them in and give them the list where we see the issues, and they work through that and find, y'all wouldn't believe the things that they find. Some of them are imminent items that we address the day they find them. A lot of that's recorded electronically, and they can transmit it to us real time from the field, so we can send a service crew or construction crew or whatever we need out.
Mm-hmm.
So what types of things are they looking for and finding?
The first thing they're looking for is any hazard. They'll if they notice a pole, they actually dig around the poles. They do a visual inspection up the pole, so they'll break ground around the pole and test the pole for stability, for its useful life, where it is in its useful life. And they will actually core the pole, drill into it and core it, and then take the sample from it and refill that void that they made when they cored it. All part of the process. But obviously looking for hazards, any kind of instability with the pole or any abnormality up the pole as far as insulators or wires that might be frayed or weakened. Stuff gets old. Everything's man-made. It gets old, and issues arise when tree limbs bounce off of it and high winds and that kind of stuff. So,
well, I mean, we're talking about hazards and whatnot. And, there's a lot of poles, I'm sure, that make up that 2,800 miles of line. And we can't have eyes everywhere. So what are some of the common things that a member might see that they could let us know about, so we might be able to address something? Because, they see the poles along their road a lot more than we do. So, I mean, what are some of the common things that they might be able to recognize?
So obviously a big one that we get all the time is a limb or a tree that's on or near the line. Those are things we want to know. If there's something doesn't look right on a pole, a conductor could be off the arm. It can lay on the arm, and every conductor we have has to be insulated somehow. And on the overhead system, they all sit on insulators. Most of them are post type insulators. If something doesn't look right, if one phase looks different than the rest, then it's quite possible there's a problem with it. And anything like that, frayed wires or low wires, low wires is a big deal for us. Last thing we want is create a hazard for the public. So a low wire would be something we want to call in and something that we'd address right away.
Just to let folks know too, I mean, we do have other utilities that connect to some of our poles in terms of services sometimes. So not every wire that you see on the pole is necessarily going to be an electrical wire. And sometimes other contractors might leave wire hanging down or something along that.
That's right.
But we still need to know about that. I mean, if it's attached to our pole, still let us know so we can address the issue.
So what I will say about that is we have contract agreements with every person who's on our pole, every entity, I should say, that's on our pole. We have agreements with them and standards that we set for them. Most of the poles, I mean, a very high percentage of the poles that we're on, we own. We do lease space to a whole lot of different companies. And what I will say about anything that might be hanging off a pole that could be a low line or a down line is call us and let us decide if that's something that is hazardous to the public to start with, and then who needs to address it. And we can work those out through our system control. Our system operators can handle who those entities are that are on a given pole. So the yellow pole tag, every pole that we have should have a yellow GPS number on it that has coordinates that are in our maps, and we can go to them. If somebody gives us that 6-digit number, we can go to them at any time. So.
Right, and even if it's not on that particular pole, just find the closest pole that you can.
Right. Yep, we've had them missing.
That has that tag number, and that still gives us a good area where to look.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the other common things that folks might be able to see is the guy wires that hold up the poles.
Yep.
So I mean, those things are supposed to be under tension, correct, to help?
Yes, they vary in tension, but yes, they should be under some level of tension. Some of them are slacker than others, but they should never be dangling loose. They should never be hanging free from the top of the pole. That's it happens. We've had bush hogs and construction equipment that get into them and break them or snatch them loose or anything like that. They can stress them and make them loose and even pop them. We've had cars hit them and pop them, so it happens.
Yeah.
And before we move off of poles, off the top, I mean, like I said, a lot of people have poles in their yards.
Sure.
They use them a lot of times to hang satellite dishes or
tree stands
or flags. We don't encourage that.
Birdhouses.
Birdhouses. Why do we discourage that type of thing?
So Michael, what I'll say about that is every person that we send up a pole is highly trained to be up there. And there's no reason we would ever encourage a homeowner to go at a level on a pole that they can't reach standing on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
They should be safe standing on the ground beside that pole. Now, when you go beyond that, there's a certain level of training required to be able to do that. And the higher you go, the higher the risk is in knowing what you're doing when you're up there. So,
yeah. And not all of our poles are accessible necessarily to our bucket trucks. So there's going to be instances where our guys are going to have to climb poles.
That's right.
And so if you've got a flagpole that's attached to it or a birdhouse that's attached to it, that's going to slow down our ability to address whatever problem is on that pole.
So yeah, absolutely. It not only will it slow them down, it creates a hazard for them when they have to take it down. It's often nailed on or screwed on, and it's just something they're going to have to remove and then worry about climbing around whatever damage was done to the pole to be able to attach it. So it last thing we'll do is create hazards for the guys who already deal with enough hazards. So.
Yeah, definitely. So, thinking about maintaining our systems and the overhead, our overhead lines are above the ground. Trees happen to be above the ground as well.
Last time I noticed.
Yeah. How does our right-of-way maintenance program dovetail with our overhead maintenance?
So our right-of-way maintenance is critical, number one, to system reliability. That's our biggest contributor to outages in our region. And I don't mean this is not exclusive to Berkeley Co-op. This is exclusive to the region we live in. Is we live in a very fertile, lot of forestry land around here, and there's a reason for it because everything grows so good.
Yep.
So our maintenance is our number one. Our right-of-way maintenance is our number one focus when it comes to reliability on the overhead system. There's a little bit of forgiveness on the underground side, but overhead is critical to maintain your right-of-way, to maintain your reliability across your system. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the overhead line, and we've got, we've mentioned it before a couple times now, about 2,800 miles, but that's actually a little bit less than we've had previously in previous years. We've gone down on that. I mean, did we lose part of the system? Did Johns Island fall into the sea? Where's that overhead line going?
So as far as I know, Johns Island's still intact. That service area still exists. Excuse me. What I will say about the overhead line is our whole area is for the last 20 plus years has been under such demand for growth. These master plan housing developments in commercial areas and that stuff, from our Goose Creek service area all the way into Moncks Corner to Johns Island. There was a time on Brownswood Road, we had 9 different housing developments under construction on Brownswood Road.
Wow.
I'm not sure what currently is going on, but I bet it's right close to that still. So all these new developments, almost every one that we design and work with the builder and developers on, they want them in the ground. And many times when we have to design them underground, it requires that we remove the long-time existing overhead service infrastructure for that area.
Right.
If you think about the area down Highway 176 from Goose Creek to Cane Bay, look at all that overhead that's coming out. The guys are steady building, they're widening the highway and steady building new multiple circuits underground, and all that overhead line's coming out. So that's going to be miles of overhead line coming out just on that one job. So
wow. As much as that area has changed over the last 20 years, it's going to just continue to change and look so very different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another year, that road's going to look totally different. That'll be a whole different landscape out there.
Yeah. I remember going from, Moncks Corner to Somerville was basically nothing but mobile home dealerships.
Yep.
And all those are gone and being replaced with actual neighborhoods and like you said, planned communities. We've got Nexton that's growing gangbusters. We've got Cane Bay, which
Nexton,
is
Carnes, Cane Bay, Wildcat.
Yeah, all of those that are just right up here in our area. And like you said, Johns Island, it actually might sink before too long because how many houses and apartments they're putting on that island.
Lots of them, for sure.
Lots of them. I mean, this is getting crazy. But, I mean, we're talking about, overhead versus underground. And so in terms of the co-op, we've actually for the first time in our history, exceeded the number of overhead lines. We've got more underground now than we do have overhead lines, and that's kind of unusual for a cooperative. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not common.
All right.
For what started back in the 40s as a rural electric service for so many areas has now become a very urban. Mm-hmm. If you think about Berkeley Electric's ratio of members per mile versus not just the co-ops within South Carolina, but the co-ops across the country, and you look at our ratio of members per mile versus the other ones, it is crazy how densely populated our service area is.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, part of the problem. I think it's one of the travel magazines keeps voting us best place to live, which, great. We definitely love it down here. And
we're full.
We're full. Yeah, no.
We don't need any more.
We're real neighborly, but we don't want to be bumping elbows with everybody.
I'm going to set every meter we can set. I want to set them all. Still, it still creates challenges getting to and from work for sure.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who are just joining us, we are talking to Mr. Tommy Harvey, the Director of Distribution Operations at Berkeley Electric Cooperative.
Nice.
But we're talking overhead versus underground lines and some of the advantages of both. We've talked a lot about overhead and how the co-op started out with being primarily an overhead type of mostly overhead lines, and we've now made that transition as we get the new neighborhoods into putting as much underground as possible. Just from a layman's terms, for folks who aren't familiar with lines, I mean, is it the same type of line that we're putting up head and we're just taking it and putting it underground? Are there any special, I'm assuming we're just not plopping a line in the ground and covering it up with dirt.
No, that's right.
How, what are the special steps that we had to be able to convert that type of line?
So, first of all, anything that goes in the ground has to be completely insulated. What the wires that you see overhead on our system are open air conductor cable. So what you see is actually energized when you look at the overhead lines, most of them. At least all of our high voltage lines are open air lines. Then anything that goes in the ground, has to be insulated. Everything we go in the ground with is in conduit. So every item that I mentioned, as far as overhead or underground, every piece of that comes at a cost. You know what I mean? Every termination for your underground, every piece of insulation on the underground, every piece of conduit, everything costs money. It on average, it's about 3 times or 3.5 times as expensive to go in the ground as it is overhead. Mm-hmm. And that varies, y'all. It's cheaper to bury through the wide open field,
right?
Mm-hmm.
When you can put 1,500 feet in the ground in a day, versus burying through the heart of Somerville or Goose Creek,
right,
where everything in the world's in your way and it takes so much time to get it done. So that's a good average cost that you can consider is about 3.5 times as expensive to put it in the ground as it is to build it overhead, and a whole lot quicker to go overhead too.
Right,
much quicker. So
yeah.
Well, I mean, from an operations standpoint, though, I mean, we know it's more expensive, and so that's one of the things that we always have to take into account because the money that we spend is our members' money.
That's right.
So we have to make sure that it makes sense for us to be able to put those lines underground as opposed to overhead, and it comes down a lot of times, like you said, to number of members per mile. So I mean, if it doesn't make as much sense to run 5 miles of underground to serve 5 people as it does run 5 miles of underground to serve 5,000 people.
No, that's right.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that we have to take into consideration. But from like an operations standpoint, is it a positive to convert overhead to underground? What are some of the advantages, I suppose?
Okay, so that's kind of a two-sided answer. Mm-hmm. I will tell you, on the surface, yes, we would like to see it in the ground. Now, obviously, as you mentioned, there's a cost that comes with that, but the reliability on the short term is typically the benefit from going underground. Mm. Now, I can tell you that when somebody digs into an underground line, that cost and time to restore that jumps dramatically. to make a repair on an underground line that has been damaged from an outside source, like a excavator, a backhoe, boring rig, or anything like that, is very expensive, and it takes a long time to do it. It's it's one thing when a tree limb falls on an overhead line, we can send a 2 or 3 man crew out, cut the tree off, pull the wire back up, and we're headed back to another call. Underground is not that way. It takes a long time to fix it, and then it takes time to put the lights back on to restore it. Often the material takes longer to get. So in the times we're in now, underground material is at a premium everywhere. So
wow.
It's certainly something to consider. There are benefits when you think about severe weather. There's no comparison when it comes to overhead versus underground. The underground is more robust and resistant to high winds and lightning and that kind of stuff. However, lightning can run in on underground. We've had it happen and damage equipment a lot. We've had it frequently. But a high water event can create all kind of havoc on your underground system. So,
Tommy, speaking of digging into lines, do you want to give a plug to one of your favorite organizations?
Absolutely. So I actually sit on the board with South Carolina 811, and that is the South Carolina one-call service for underground facility locating. Any member or contractor can call 811 and get a locate ticket, make a single call, and every entity that would be affected by that digging location that you declare would be notified to come out and locate the line. So, yeah, absolutely appreciate it, Libby.
And it's a free service.
Yep, free service.
Just give them a couple days, right?
Yeah, 3 days, 72 hours, business days, not weekends and holidays. So 3 full business days to get the locate done. You should be good to go.
So what happens if you don't get a locate and you cut through a line?
Okay, yeah, that's all kinds of problems. One, obviously, the first thing is you risk personal injury. You can personal injury or equipment injury. We've had equipment damage, burned up. We've had cranes burnt completely to the ground.
Wow.
$1 million cranes that were destroyed because they were stuck into something energized. But, the first thing is getting somebody hurt. That's the last thing you want to do is have somebody get hurt. Then as it goes, we've had folks who are multi-time offenders of that and not just refuse to call in and get locates when they're digging across our system. And there are punitive actions that the state takes for folks that do that. And that's a big deal. When it goes to the Attorney General's office in Columbia and they start handing down penalties for not calling 811, it becomes something we got to do. So
right. Now you're talking about digging into stuff. For the general person out there with a shovel, how likely is it for them to even encounter a line? I mean, they're buried pretty deep for the most part.
So in the general population with a shovel in their yard, they can find one easy. You would have no problem getting down to your service wire. It could be in the 2-foot range generally. So if you're planting a 15-gallon shrub from Lowe's, you're going to go deep enough to find your service wire.
Okay.
So I encourage you 100%. If you're going to plant shrubs, if you're going to install irrigation system in your yard, if you're going to put in a new mailbox post, you're going to do it, call in advance, call ahead, let us come out and locate it.
Yeah.
And what color is the paint on the ground for us?
For us, the electric would be red. Anything red is electric, and orange would be information or some kind of telecom cable.
Okay. Well, we're doing a lot of new stuff underground, and giving us a little bit of the positive side. We're talking about the reliability standpoint for underground. But it also can be a little bit more of a challenge to work on it because, like you said, if it's a break in the line or on the overhead or a tree limb, that's something easy we can see as we're driving along. Not so easy to see where a problem is underground, but I understand that we've got some new equipment that's going to help us with that. So yes, we actually just replaced some old equipment that we had. Got a new. Put it in a new van. It's a what we've dubbed as our mobile test lab, and this equipment can actually go to an underground facility anywhere on our system. We've got one
We got one in all 4 districts, but this new one will be in Johns Island. But it can go anywhere on the underground system. The guys can de-energize a line section. Maybe it's a failed line section, or maybe it's a maintenance item that they're looking at. They can de-energize it, go through a couple of precautionary steps, hook this equipment to it, and they can test the integrity of the cable. They can see that the cable is good or not. If its cable's failed, it'll tell them that. It's got a radar unit on it where it can actually measure the length of the cable. It'll give them the distance from where they've connected to the cable at this van to where the faulted location is, and then it'll send an audible signal down the wire that they can hear when they get close to the location of the fault. So it's pretty good technology. It's been around a long time, but it's a great technology, and we use it quite often because we've had high voltage underground lines now since the 70s. Sometime in the 70s we started this stuff. So it's all man-made, and it will fail, so we'll need it. And we continue to use it. Guys use it all the time.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you had mentioned Johns Island. We've made a few little off-the-cuff remarks about Johns Island. We love our folks down there, by the way.
That's right.
Yeah, for those of you who are listening, you are some of our favorite members. But, you were saying water is a problem, especially along the coast when we have major storms come through. We have the associated storm surge.
That's right.
And that can cause some unique problems along the coast when it comes to underground service, if I remember correctly, when we've had some in the past. Does it cause like extra steps, or we've got floodwaters? Obviously, we're not going to be water and electricity don't mix, so we don't want to be trying to heat anything back up. We got to wait till the floodwaters recede.
Salt water.
Yeah. I was about to say, is there any particular challenges with dealing with salt water with underground?
Absolutely. So what has happened in the past, the first time it really, in my tenure here, the first time we really saw it happen was in 2015, and I think it happened again in 17. When was Irma? 17?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think Irma was 17. Both of those events, one was the 1,000-year flood or whatever it was. We had
a couple of those, didn't we?
Yeah. Who's counting these years? 'Cause I don't. So we had an event in 15, an event again in 2017 that brought high water onto our coastal service areas. And one of the issues that we learned from that is, everybody knows that salt water is very caustic and degrades your equipment. But this event in 15 got up high enough in our facilities that it made contact with some mechanical connections inside of our equipment that caused those connections to break down months later. After we got lights back on, everybody's lights were good to go, restoration's complete. Then we ended up having issues that we found sporadically around the areas that saw the high water. So we obviously you learn from things like that, and when I say we, the cooperative invested in some equipment now that if we see those events again, we're going to go back in and we're going to freshwater flush that equipment before we ever re-energize them and get that salt water, as much of it as we can, get it off of our equipment and try to prevent some of those real sporadic inconsistencies in service that we saw after some high water events on the salt side of things. So. Yeah, that's a lot of headache for the guys running service work throughout the day to catch those day after day. You just see so many of them. They we're gonna do things a little differently that you learn from on events like that. So.
Right. Yeah.
And the crews are so busy and have been for the decade plus.
That's right.
We're building as fast as we can and maintaining a system that we've been in business for 80 years. So it's really a lot to manage both sides of that.
Yep, it is. It's a double-edged sword because you've got so much growth going on. You're trying to manage your growth and meet the demands of new service requests. And the whole time your system is aging and you have maintenance that has to be done weekly. So, it's just one of those things that has to be done.
And I think one of the most important things that folks need to remember about the whole talk about overhead and underground and which one is more reliable, at some point somewhere, there is a line in the air that is feeding that underground.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, the line might be underground, but I mean, even if it goes back to the sub, somewhere there is a line in the air that can be affected by falling trees or other types of mechanical issues. So, everybody, thank y'all for tuning in. This has been Power Talk, and it's the official broadcast of your electrical local cooperative. You can catch up on past episodes on streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple, and iHeartRadio, and get a behind-the-scenes look on Berkeley Electric's YouTube channel. So until next time, this is Power Talk, signing off.